are okay. Right. Okay. So welcome everybody. I'm TJ, specialist in highly gifted education, and I'm on a mission to make the world better by helping gifted kids become more happy, autonomous, and successful. And in our weekly Q&A today, we're going to be talking about play because play in the Netherlands, particularly, is a really, really important part of our curriculums in regular schools as well as in gifted and talented programs. And we believe, particularly for our gifted kids, there's a lot of challenges that they have to overcome. So I thought I'll take you through a little bit of what the concepts of play are, how we implement them in different countries worldwide, and then finally how we do it in our gifted and talented programs that we're running in Malaysia. But the opportunity for all of you to ask a few questions like how can you use this at home? So we'll start with some interesting questions, right? And then this is about play itself. So when we talk about play, maybe we can see in the chat a few guesses of how many minutes a school day the average child plays in the following countries. And this country here is will use the US because unfortunately the actual data on how much play the Malaysian kids play is not much, but it might maybe help if you as parents give an estimate of what you think your kid plays on average per day. Right, so let you guys think of that a little bit. We'll check in the chat. Just throw them out there. These answers might be tough, although some of you might already look at ChatGPT for this. So we'll start with a country that's been in the news a lot lately, and that is the United States. So the average that I could find for play per day in the United States is about 27 minutes, right? So let's see how that stacks up to other countries. Now, a lot of the schools we work with are IGCSE schools, so the UK is an important one. And the average that the UK says that they have is about 60 minutes per day. And I think a lot of the international schools that I work with personally have about the 60 minutes. There's a few shorts. There's normally a short break and a longer break for lunch, and then sometimes even shorter break a little bit in the afternoon. But 60 minutes is what I tend to see in the international schools here in Malaysia as well. So Finland sits at 75 minutes, right? Per day as part of their curriculum, which doesn't seem like that much more for compared to the UK, to be honest, because it's always been held up as like, hey, play is such an important part. There is an important bit here. The average day that the kids are in school, like the average amount of hours that the kids are in school in Finland is only about 4.5 hours, which is significantly less than any of the other countries here. The Netherlands sits actually somewhere between 70 to 110 minutes per day. That's how much we allocate towards play in a normal school setting. The reason why it varies a bit is because there's a minimum standard that we need to have in terms of play, but the schools get a lot of freedom to actually decide how much extra play they can do. And one other thing that's interesting is we have quite a lot of different school systems where some of the kids would already be done by about 12:30 for school as well. And then the rest of the day would be considered play in the Netherlands, but it's not actually advocated towards this play in the school. So this is where Netherlands sits when it comes to play itself. So as you can see, between Netherlands and Finland, that's quite high amounts. Like it's in some cases almost double what the UK does. And let's not talk what happens in in the US. As I said, I couldn't find the amount of play that actually Malaysia has. I don't think it's being tracked that much, or there's not a lot of research being done into it. And this is kind of interesting. Like the way that we look at play in the Netherlands is such that the average amount of hours that a kid in the Netherlands plays at the moment is about 8 to 9 hours per week. So that's the amount of playtime kids get in the Netherlands. Now, maybe as a Malaysian parent, you might want to think a bit like, okay, looking at your kids, how much actual time do they have to play? And why, like, is it so important? We're going to get into it a little bit later. But in the Netherlands, we actually view this amount of hours as a problem because this is down by about 2 hours on average from the last 4 years. Right. So even in the Netherlands, we're struggling a little bit with the amount of play, but this is considered an emergency situation in the Netherlands. So there's a lot of parental work, and like researchers are working together with government institutions to figure out ways to help with this. And there's a few measures that they say. The reason it's not like this like simple average, because there's a big distinction between kids living in cities and kids living in more rural areas in the Netherlands. So the 8 hours is city playtime, and the 9 hours is rural playtime. And I think you can probably see where I'm going with this, because this is kind of the same problem in Malaysia, where a lot of city kids struggle to find play. Now, one of the things that we see in Netherlands that have been reducing this number of hours of play is actually not computer games, funny enough. So it's not computer games, it's a lack of friends. So that's what about 30% of kids say, almost 40% of kids say, I'm struggling to find friends. That's why I'm not playing. And like, I actually want to get rid of playing on the computer, but it's hard. And another big contributor is, and this might be another statistic that might be very interesting, is that about a third like of kids don't have access to a playground. But not like in general. In the Netherlands, we say less than 200 meters away. So in the Netherlands, that means about 2/3 of the Netherlands, like almost 70%, a playground is accessible to kids within 200 meters. And that is like basically in politics, one of the things that they're trying to address right now. They call it uneven distribution of playground access. And I thought it would be interesting to bring that up, because I think if you look at the access to actual playgrounds, for a lot of parents that are living in a little bit suburban areas, not in condos, for example, they struggle to have that access as well, right? So what is going on in Malaysia? Like, do you feel as parents that your kids have the opportunity to play for that many hours a week? And, are they close to a playground that they could actually play in? And the thing with play is, and like this might be a good opportunity to start looking into what actual play is that a lot of parents that I speak to here in Malaysia, they sort of misunderstand what actual play is. They say, oh, no, I mean, my kids go to all kinds of ECA places where they can meet all kinds of people. I've got a lot of sports that I'm signing them up to. Like the idea that like a lot of kids have to be kept busy, like social emotional courses and things like that. Like, and it's sort of the assumption is that these are kind of a replacement of what play is. But what we actually see is that this is definitely not the case. The way, particularly how the Netherlands and Finland classify play, is that it's really a tool for kids to learn how to be social. And what we're looking for is unsupervised, unstructured play. And that is something very different than what we see. So what is the difference here? Like structured versus unstructured play. So a lot of people that I work with, when they see like a little field where people can play football, they ask themselves like, okay, well, is that play? And particularly here in Malaysia, a lot of the kids that I see do sports, they do it in a sports field setting. They do it during an ECA. So it's essentially they're playing sports, right? Like the word is like playing sports, but is this actual play? And the answer to that is no, it is not. It is categorically something different than unstructured play. And I'll explain why. So a very important characteristic of play itself is that play is almost like a social understanding between multiple individuals, right? Where rules are fluid. So what happens is like if I say, okay, we're going to play a game, generally speaking, maybe as adults, and using a sport is a good example of like what not unstructured play is that okay, we're going to play a game, we're at a field, the field has a specific size. Most of the time the everything has like specific rules, so there is somebody enforcing those rules as well that isn't part of the group that decides to play, right? So this is the referee, and then we have a number of people actually playing the game, and they have to follow rules. And if those rules are not followed, you can be ejected from the game itself. All right, so those rules are set in advance. So particularly with a game of football at a club setting, the kids have absolutely no say in what those rules are. They're sort of brought down from whatever league that you're playing, and then there's different leagues around. Like you have Aussie football, which is almost a completely different sport, of course. But all of them have different rules about what kind of contact you're allowed to do, how many minutes you play, you name it, right? And we start on a particular time, and that's when we start playing, and we finish in a particular time. So in a sense, what happens is we have external rules, and that's really the biggest part of play that a lot of people don't understand. When you get a group of kids together, and you just basically tell them, okay, go into this grass field. The only rule that we as parents maybe set up is like, go into this grass field. You have to stay there for, quite a while. But what you do in there, I don't care. I'm not even going to look at it. I'm just going to walk away. When you do that to a group of kids, something really magical happens. The kids, obviously, at first, they don't know each other and what's going on, and they'll start talking. But very quickly, the group starts to sort of, like particularly if some of the kids get bored, they start figuring out ways to entertain themselves. So they'll start coming up with some kind of game. And what we tend to see is that particularly with young kids, like the younger they are, so the less likely they have been to actually run into some kind of external rules, the more likely it is that the play itself looks messy. Like there's almost like as if nothing tangible is going on. We don't quite understand what the kids are doing. There seems to be a lot of running. There seems to be a lot of like tagging or sometimes and things like that. But to an outside observer that doesn't know what to look for, play looks like a chaotic mess, as if the kids are not actually learning anything at all. And that it can't be further from the truth. Because when kids decide to play, what is actually happening is a sort of social structure starts to form, where one of the more brave kids sort of stands up and says, okay, I have an idea. I want to do a certain kind of game. And if that game is easy enough for the other kids to understand, that person might actually influence one or two other kids around them to sort of play the game as well. So because that child is a little bit more brave, that normally gets few kids looking, oh, now, because that person is brave, I will be brave to join in and talk and do some things as well. And that forms a little group. So you get a little group of kids that start to decide to play a certain kind of game. Then very quickly, and this is like when you observe these kids, it's very quick. All of a sudden, without like, it doesn't look like a lot of kids are talking about this at all. There's no formal vote or anything else. The group basically just starts playing a game, and it goes very quickly. And then the kids tend to enjoy themselves. However, there's a kind of a balance in that group. So as long as the majority of the kids enjoy that game, the game will keep going on. And this is another very big aspect of play. Play is not like when you do a sport or a game, for example, the object is normally to win the game by finishing it. Play, however, the object is to keep playing. So that's what you're trying to do. You try to keep playing. And the object is to keep playing in a way that most people have fun. The moment that that is no longer the case, the entire play group switches to something else, and that can also be pretty quick, right? So the game becomes stale, like repetitive, whatever it is that the kids don't like. Somebody comes up with a suggestion that is a little bit more interesting, and then they start playing that. Sometimes the group breaks up into two bits, and maybe they were playing hide and seek before, and now all of a sudden they want to start playing tag. And you can see that happening like like a fluid motion. Like when you observe that going, there's very little conversations that need to happen. Like maybe there's some one-on-one conversation between one or two kids, but it's not like not very often. Definitely not with these younger groups that one kid says, "I want to do something different." Now, what is interesting though is that in that kind of setting, the leaders there, they cannot push their will through fully. If they kind of a bully, if they're like, no, we're going to play it my way, this is how it needs to happen. Sometimes the group just decides to completely ignore that person. So even if you have a kid that is a little bit of a leader role in that particular group setting, if they push their will through too hard, then the group will probably not take it and they'll stop. Similarly, so if you have one or two kids that don't like what is happening in this play situation, what tends to happen is that they'll say, "Oh, I don't want to do this," and they'll start to sulk and they start to walk around and they start kicking rocks. And then they sort of ask the group, like, "I want to play something else." But if the group is having fun, the group will ignore that child. And very quickly, after child normally gets over that frustration, like, "Oh, nobody listen to me, I hate this game," they sit there, they're bored, they're like a little bit frustrated, they want to do something else. The emotions sort of go through them, and then they deal with it. And then you see a lot of them decide, okay, you know what, I'm just going to join. What is really, really important in this setting is like that's what we want to happen. Like we want basically all these kids to learn to give and take. That is what being social means. Social isn't like some external rules that we follow. Generally speaking, if you look at a really close group of friends that you have as a parent, you didn't sit down at one point and say, okay, let's draft a little rule sheet on like how we're going to talk to each other as a group of friends. Like who is the like in your group of friends, like you have somebody who's a leader, but you never formally voted for that person. Yet you know that some people are more likely to give suggestions. There's some people that are more likely to follow suit. And even within that kind of friend setting, like all of that social interaction about giving and taking, if you're the one that always says like, no, I don't want to go there, I don't want to go there, but the rest does want to go, they might go without you. And that feels very exclusionary and like and frustrating for you as an adult. And then you have a choice. So like, okay, you know what? I'm just going to go with my friends, or you're going to go find a new group. And that is exactly what being social is about. Now, where things go a little bit wrong when I think about like when a lot of our parents, when they try to work together with the kids, or in a lot of schools that we go to where playtime is there, is that they introduce actually a lot of these external rules. And then also there is referees. So in referees is like parents or teachers that basically step in and disrupt the unstructured version of play. And that is a problem because when that happens, so we as parents sort of jump in and say, okay, like everybody play together. Then we basically change the nature of that play group. And this can be very difficult. So what we tend to see is that like the group wants to play hide and seek. One of the kids doesn't want to play hide and seek. And then the group says, no, we're going to play. And then the kid walks up to an adult, like a teacher or a parent, and says, they are not fair. They don't want to play with me. And then a lot of parents, but this is even particularly if it's your own child, obviously want their child to be more social. So, and they want the child to be included. So what we do is we walk up to that group, and then we use the authority that we are as a parent or as a teacher, and we decide to tell the group, all right, you guys have to play together. Now, okay, you guys will just have to vote on what game you're going to play, and then you have to play that game. So what we're doing is we're then also bringing in external rules, right? And in some cases, I've seen kids basically been called to task by both parents and teachers about the fact that, oh, you're excluding this particular person. And there is sometimes situations where kids are excluding based on race or other things and stuff, which definitely isn't correct. But a lot of times, particularly in younger kids, the what we're actually doing is we're basically denying this child that didn't want to conform to the group the opportunity to learn and deal with the consequence of that. Like sometimes if you want to play with others, you have to change what you want to do. And there is some examples and also stories that I can tell you of children that basically try to do this a lot with us, and how we work with this in Passend to teach particularly gifted kids how to read a social group like this, how to make changes without it coming across like you're trying to manipulate people or you're trying to bully people into things. It's really important. And it's not just for the kids that like are excluded in that situation, but also for the kids that are basically just trying to push their will through. And like particularly with gifted kids, we see a lot of kids like saying, "Okay, no, I've got more complex rules. We can do this and this and this," and they also often will use external referees and rules. So they'll say, "Okay, you know what? This game is very similar to a game of football. Therefore, we're just going to play with the rules of football, and that's what it is." And funny enough, like a ball, like a football, for example, if you have no goals and no referees and anything else, and you throw that ball in a group, that ball can become part of the play. Right? There is ways you can play football with only one goal, for example, but the way that that group then decides to do this, it needs to form naturally, and then that group comes up with a rule set that on like how long you can play, how they make teams, all that kind of stuff, and that is again one of those things where we as adults or as teachers often fail in helping our kids. So this is the real important part with structured versus unstructured play. And this is tough in Malaysia, I understand. Technically, there is also unsupervised. And that is very, very rare. But in the Netherlands, it's really common. Actually, another country which is really good at play, but had very high play levels, is Japan. I think they have 50 minutes play for every hour. Although, again, a lot of that is sort of structured play, not necessarily unstructured play, but still there's a lot of freedom that they have. But countries where things are very safe, we let our kids play in the playground without any kind of supervision, which means no parents present and so on. This is a tough one for parents because you can argue like, okay, like, are they safe? Like, will they be running into problems? The thing that I always bring up here is like, what is the potential thing that they lose? Because again, like when I look at like play in Malaysia here in particular, I see too many of the kids constantly going to adults or older kids or whatever to sort of regulate the play experience, and the end result is that these kids become less and less included in groups, right? And we know in Malaysia that we have a lot of issues with social emotional development. So it is so crucial part that in the Netherlands and Finland we make it really a big part of the actual education system in primary, but even in secondary, there's still a lot of unsupervised play opportunities that we bring in. Although as kids get older, the influence of game rules and other kind of ways to play, like games and stuff, becomes bigger and bigger. And therefore, that's one of the other reasons why the developmental process in these early stages, where you say like kids up to 1 to 6 years, really build a lot of their value systems. It's partly because we tend to let them play on more in kindergarten, for example, and then when we get to to primary school, we stop letting them play in the same way. So what we see, Denmark is also another country where this is really important. The longer we let kids play, the less issues we see with social stuff, and this is something others that is very interesting. When you look at like the UK, the UK has a certain way of look, and the US is very similar. We call it pastoral, right? So like in most schools in international setting, but also in the UK, we have a pastoral department, and these departments are actually quite big, with with a head of pastoral, normally like one pastoral lead per grade. So that's like you're looking at like 6 in primary, but even in secondary, there's a lot. So you're looking at potentially like 11 to like 13 pastoral leads that are based, their only job is to sort of keep the kids in line and following kind of rules. We don't have pastoral in the Netherlands at all. It just doesn't exist. We don't need it. And it's the same for Finland. It's the same for Denmark. Like, but we have mentors. That is something different because, of course, we have kids that sometimes go off the rails. But the idea that we have to have a special department to just make sure that people don't break rules is really not much of a thing in the Netherlands. And play and interactions are becoming are seen much more as a social kind of thing. And the way that we structure that in how the schools are built and how the interactions are with the wider community are a big part of that. And that is something that I'll go into a little bit more detail now, right? Because so what we say, what is play? Well, it's like no rules, right? So no rules, social, infinite game. That's basically what they're trying to do. A game that doesn't stop. And finally, and this is the important part, fun, right? Plus social. That's what we want. So that's play. But there's two different versions of play that are starting to basically make a big resurgence, is maybe the right word, in particularly in China. But the actual idea comes from a few scholars from Sweden, Netherlands, and Denmark. And it's the concept of risky play and green play. Now, risky play is the idea that we let kids do things that actually have the potential to hurt them. Now, not on purpose, but the things that they do when it comes to playing in playgrounds should be scary enough that it could hurt. And that sort of looks like this. So this is an actual playground in the Netherlands. We call these green playgrounds. And as you can see, real wood, which is like when you look at playgrounds in Malaysia, these things tend to be covered in rubber and whatnot. And there's almost no wood because there might be some splinters, like quite high little tumbles and falls, like things to jump on. Like if a kid slips, it will probably hurt quite a bit. These things are quite high with no notable rubber like supports on the bottom. Now, the idea with all of these heights is that these heights need to be high enough to break an arm. That's what I say. Like if it's high enough for a kid to potentially break an arm, then it's scary enough for kids to actually do something with it. Because there's something else important when it comes to playground time, is that actually one of the most important things that kids learn is dealing with their internal fear. So when they actually start walking on these higher areas and they climb and they fall, they are constantly testing their boundaries. And kids that don't play in these kind of risky playgrounds, compared to kids that do, show a lot more risk avoidance. And that's not just in like doing things like climbing. It shows up in their academic work. It shows up in their social work. And so it's like if as a child you constantly are testing how you feel, like, oh, that's scary and I'm going to try, and I'm scary and I'm going to try. And like in this playground setting, because it's 8 hours, right? So you have to imagine that if you're a little toddler and you're in this kind of playground and there's like a bunch of other kids and there's barely any parents around, right? So they're not really, there's this social stuff going on. And then the kids come up with a game where you have to climb over these things quickly, whatever it is. Like these games are all over the place. They're really fun to watch. And if you're scared of this, like you want to play, but you can't because you're scared. And then every time you're there, you're a bit bored. And constantly you're basically being confronted with this kind of fear. And it's like you're doing like almost a natural version of exposure therapy. So it's getting used to fear. It's getting used to overcoming that fear up until such a point that they go up and they'll find, oh, actually this stuff is not as high and dangerous as I thought it was. So I overcame some of my fear. That's a really good feeling. I get to play with a group of friends. That's an amazing reward. And then, oh, the games get more and more dangerous. And but that the trick is like, can these things be dangerous enough for them to really feel like, okay, if I fall down, I'm going to hurt myself? Because if that's not the case, it is not really a test of fear. Right. So what we tend to see with like these playgrounds is like, yeah, a toddler will probably be scared of the kind of playgrounds you see in Malaysia. But anybody in grade 3 or 4 goes like, I'm not really bothered with this. And we can see this in a lot of the schools that we were at. Like, they have some of these amazing playgrounds, but nobody's using them, not even in the breaks, because they're just too boring. They're too safe. Now, another element of this is all this greenery. So all the greenery, the wooden stuff that we use. There's a very interesting bit of research also coming from the Netherlands, that the amount of aggressiveness amongst kids playing in these green playgrounds drops by like over 30%, which is a significant amount. So you take kids that and the more colors you actually introduce in these sort of playgrounds, the more aggressive they become. It actually also applies to a lot of our kindergartens. There's way too much color. So for the kids that are sensitive to overstimulation, maybe you recognize some of your children, all these colors are not helping them. And green is one of those colors that really helps with that. But just nature in itself, and this, like, you've probably gone out on a hike in nature, you go out and it's almost like, oh man, like I feel more relaxed, right? And the same applies here. So we see a lot less, like, the irony is that if you see a reduction in aggression by 30% in each kids, the actual net fights and other things that happen in these kind of, it drops more than 30%, because everybody drops in aggressiveness. So escalation becomes a lot less of an issue. And again, this all helps towards like being able to send your kids here with knowing that they're not going to get into a big bullying kind of situation. So this is green playground. So they're really good. Now, risky play, actually, this is believe it's near the areas of Guangzhou. There's a few scholars from China that studied in the Netherlands that ran into these risky play ideas, and they built this really cool like philosophy around it. And they went to the local government in China and they said, all right, I'm going to let's bring risky play in all its formats to all the kindergartens that we can find. And what they talked about, like, okay, increase the speed of things that are there, increase the height. Let's use more little bit like semi-dangerous tools. So, for example, what they do is they take like these big wooden blocks that they can use to build stuff. And you've probably seen versions of this where people have these foam blocks. It's like, oh, like, and like you got like these indoor playgrounds in Malaysia, and they have these massive foam blocks. And when you actually look at how many kids play with those things, nobody really cares. Again, way too safe. Like, you stack them once or twice, really boring. So what they did with risky play in China is they took these really big wooden blocks that are quite heavy. You drop them on your toe, you're gonna probably have like a bruised toe. And that made the buildings cool, right? Because now we can build stuff and we can stand on it, and it's wobbly and it's not really consistent. And then you had these little pegs and even like metal bolts and stuff. Like, they're not super sharp, but there's some ways to bolt these things together with hammers and things. And big planks, like planks that are like 3 times the size of an actual child, so they can make their own structures where they can actually walk across and then stack all these steps up like quite high. And honestly, what they saw is like all these kids, like, again, taking more risk, not like getting hurt, but then also dealing with but minor injuries, right? Like really minor injuries that they'll heal from. The kids are really resilient, and then they also see like a massive engagement increase with the lessons that they were running, risk taking that was happening there, and that actually persists. Like, so when you help them there, like years later, you still see the impact of it. There's a few schools that are starting to implement this. There's Sri KDU in Penang, that you previously called XCL. Their head of primary I had the opportunity to work with and train a bit, and we talked about play. And he's really taken that idea and it's gone all the way to China to have a look at like what they're doing there. And they brought this really amazing risky play bit into their early years center, and it looks a lot of fun. Like so much fun that I would want to go there and build a fort out of like wooden planks and stuff like that. Like so what they see now is that like I spoke to at the conference a while back, and he says, yeah, you know, like we're thinking of maybe introducing this to the older kids. Right, so in the Netherlands we have this particular playground. It's in the summer. It's very close to this action program that I did. What they do is during summer, the kids go there and the parents drop them off in the morning, and they pick them up in the evening. And basically, the only thing that is there is massive, massive, massive amounts of scrap wood, like from pallets to like planks to whatnot, and tools to saw, and there's like nails, and that's it. And for a week or two, you just build wooden forts and tree houses, whatever. And like they basically can build whatever they want. And kids that go to those places, they're just there, like, you know, like becoming a bit of a risky engineer. And these forts, of course, like at the end of the summer, they all get broken down and all that kind of stuff. Not They're definitely not 100% safe, but you can see that like kids will be going to those kind of camps until they're like 12, 13 years old. And there's really not much of a guidance there. There's like somebody there to say if somebody hits themselves on the hand with a nail, there's basically first aid person there. The kids do everything themselves. Right, so risky play and green play, because this is in the middle of the forest, right, doesn't have to be limited to something like this, which is typically for more up to kids like grade 3 or something like that. So this is something that I hope to be able to see in Malaysia some point in the future. But I think it will probably need a few brave parents that are willing to, to send their kids off without looking over their shoulders. So keep an eye on that. Right. So let's get a little bit into then like what we're doing with play in Passend and why it's such an important part to us. So play in Passend is trying to solve specific problems. And the first one is solving again for this love and belonging tier within gifted and in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is a lot of kids don't really know how to play. They don't feel like they're part of like a normal play group. And we find that like the play time and the time that we spend with the kids really helps them build better bonds. It helps the kids understand each other. There is a little bit of conflict as on occasion between the kids, and we actually purposely don't intervene as much as normally a school would. All right. What we do is we manage the aftermath and emotions with particular kids, because they do need to feel like they're safe. But when it comes to like, oh, they're not playing with me, we don't make the group play. We would teach the child how to address why they're not necessarily being listened to. Because generally, and of course, if there is kind of like racial kind of stuff in there, we would address that too. But generally speaking, during the actual play session, we don't immediately address it. We only address it afterwards in our effective time. So we solve for love and belonging, and then we also solve for what we call asynchronous development. So this is where some stories might be in order. I've had gifted kids that were 11 years old that have never had the opportunity to play a game of hide and seek, simply because they've always been so advanced in everything else that they've sort of excluded themselves from these kind of groups. And then sometimes they get so scared of, like asking to join, that they don't they it becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like, oh, nobody wants to play with me, and then at some point it's like, oh, I don't know how to play, I'm scared to ask how to play because it'll make me look even more less part of the group, because everybody knows how to play hide and seek, right? So like those kind of thoughts with gifted kids become very hard for them, and then they sort of find other ways to entertain themselves, which is reading books or just like computer games or whatever it is that they can do. So that's that asynchronous development. Like a lot of gifted kids struggle with this, and even with some of the kids, like we had a few sessions in help like today, where the kids were like, yeah, but you know how to play hide and seek. And then just basically getting kids to say, well, I don't know, which, like it takes a bit of courage to say, I don't know how to play hide and seek. Then the person that said, I know how to play hide and seek was explaining the rules, and then sort of found out that actually he didn't quite know the rules for hide and seek. And then we just thought maybe you guys should just figure out what you guys want to do as rules for hide and seek. And then we didn't step in. We let them figure it out. And within a couple of minutes, they were just playing like normal kids, right? So we basically help with that, facilitating this. And it's when I train my teachers and when we work together with teachers who like what that works, that we basically we try to be far enough away that the kids can't really see that we're observing them, right? So that if an injury happens, we are there, right? But we actively do not partake in the actual management of the group itself. Now that does mean we sometimes get kids coming sit next to us and they get really sad. So we had one girl that we were working with when she started with us. She was like 4 years old. And she basically went from 4 years old straight into so when she was five, she went into year three in IB school, right? So she skipped like a bunch of years. So when she came to our center, like the hide and seek part of things was like everybody loved it. Like, so they were basically playing hide and seek every time. The group got to decide what kind of game they were going to play, and everybody. What kind of happened was that they all figured out, okay, this is the rules for hide and seek. We got some agreement. Everybody enjoyed it, and they just kept playing hide and seek over and over and over. And this girl like had a bit of a tendency to get like adults to do things for her. So we were sitting and observing this, and she comes sit next to us and she's crying. Like and she would have sometimes she would cry just to get people to do stuff for her. And in this case, like it was a bit of a combination of that. She's like, I'm so frustrated, this hide and seek every time. I want you to change it, Mr. TJ. And I had a conversation. I told her, I'm sorry, like I don't think that's right. Like the group wants to play, but she's like, yeah, but I'm so tired of hide and seek. I said, well, that's a fair thing to say. You could be like, well, how would you let the group know? And she's like, I don't know. Like they're just playing. And I said, well, why don't you have a look at the actual group, see what's going on? And when you looked at the group initially, everybody looked like they were playing hide and seek, but actually what was happening was like a group of like five of them that was playing hide and seek. And there were about seven of them that were sort of trying to join in, but halfway through they always gave up. One was like literally like looking at plants and stuff. And I told this girl, I said, hey, like, does it look like that person is enjoying themselves? Does it look like that kid is enjoying themselves? And she's like, no, not really. I said, okay, well, what could you do then? So I don't know. Maybe I should ask them if we could do something else. So yeah, I mean, if you don't have to play with the group if you don't want to, right? But if you're not like if the group all is playing, like then you have to join probably. But if a few of them are not, what other game would you like to play? So yeah, I would love to play tag. So why don't you go find somebody to play tag with? And maybe ask like one or two others that you see that are not enjoying themselves. So she said, okay, I'm going to try. And she walked up there and then she spoke to two or three people and they started playing tag. And the entire group, without saying a word, just switched to playing tag like just there and then. Right. So that is like getting that kind of emotional understanding of like how these groups work. Like you can literally teach kids this. And when you do, then you start seeing like this confidence coming up. Now I know that like what she's doing, she's basically she's doing like exceptionally well in the school, and basically saying, oh, I'm going to do this particular kind of game. She's been joining every ACA you can think of. This was a girl that was basically scared to hand in anything that she was scared that would be wrong. She would erase her Chinese like 25 times, would never participate in any kind of games. But we did have to do a few things to make that happen. So funny enough, we had to set rules on what other stuff they weren't allowed to do. So in most situations in kindergarten and schools, the kids that don't want to want to play will find something else to get entertained with, which is either books or talking to adults, or if they have phones, they will go on their phones and whatever. And in some cases with us, some of the kids will just go, "Can I just stay behind and work a little bit more on my project, or can I still do the other thing? I don't want to finish." Like there was kids that literally would delay finishing a project so that they didn't have to participate in the actual actual play that was supposed to happen. And we would challenge them on that. So what we would say is like, nope, like books stay in the classroom, and you're not allowed to stay in the classroom by yourself. So that's it. Right. So you can go sit outside and watch everybody play, or you can choose to play. Up to you. We're not going to force you to go into that particular group, but you're not allowed to do anything that will entertain you otherwise. And the point being that we want them to experience that little bit of boredom and then decide what to do with it. And that boredom is often enough of a motivator to overcome their fear of trying to join the group. Right. So it is really important as a parent that you do something similar. And that might be a good time to talk a bit about the at home tips, right? So like what could you do at home to allow for that play a little bit more? Now, first of all, like you need to understand that you have to make time. If there is no time for the kids to actually play, then it's not going to happen. As simple as that. And now that you know that play isn't the same as going for football practice, maybe figure out a time where it's like, okay, like what could I do to allow time for my kids to be in a situation where they have to play or be bored otherwise? So what can you do that creates that kind of situation? And this is some of you might live in a condo. Condos tend to have kindergartens, and if you allow your kids to, you can just say, okay, you can go there, and I'm not going to be there at the actual kindergarten bit. So, like you can maybe give them their own key. Like obviously, if they're younger, like really young, what you might need to do is say, okay, you know what, I'm going to be somewhere far away, and I'm like do something that makes you distracted from entertaining your child, right? So what form that takes, you have to just figure out what you like to do. But like, I'm in a condo here near Monte Chiara, and it's there's a French and a German school very close by. So almost all the parents here are from a Western background, and the playground is basically full of kids that are just playing the whole time. So and no parents watching them. So that means that like the kids can go down and they know that there's some kids to play with. So that's important, right? So you make time, and you make sure that there's a place to play. So where are their friends? What does that look like? So find a place with kids. Now that doesn't always mean that you have like some of you might not live in a situation that's the case, but there's some places where you could potentially do this. So Days of Park City, for example, has like a little shopping mall area with like a very very big playground close to it. I believe it's called the Waterfront, if I'm not mistaken. And there's always tons of kids playing there. So what you could do is you could basically go there. Maybe you need to do some shopping anyways if you live close by enough, and basically go, okay, like you go play in the playground. I'm gonna sit here and talk to some other adults, and if they're a little bit older, or they particularly works really well if you have siblings that can look after each other a little bit. You could maybe do like some light shopping there and let the kids actually play. Like I know this is one of those scary things as a parent, but like Malaysia itself is actually not as dangerous as a lot of people think. It's just that social media makes you feel that that's the case. But yeah, I mean, one way to deal with that is teach your kids how to ignore strangers, for example, and so on. But like if you have a group of kids that look after each other, you'd be surprised how vigilant they are amongst each other. And most people that have bad intentions will not approach a group of kids like that, because kids do take care of each other a lot more. Right. So find a place that you feel comfortable with kids. There is some other examples of this. You can go to these indoor playground facilities. They actually get very close to that kind of stuff. I feel that unfortunately the prices are not that cheap, but there is some really nice versions of those. And you, particularly with some of the younger kids, like dropping them in there. There's normally cafe, so you can do maybe some of your own work or whatever it is. That those are really good. The big other thing is that like this is the biggest tip, is like stop intervening. right? Because that is basically where you turn play into a game and you stop all the social interactions from happening. Funny enough, that kind of thing can also happen with particular game materials that aren't necessarily outside play. I'm very good at, like, I used to work for a company called Games Workshop. They make Warhammer, which are these toy soldiers. They're very complex games with crazy difficult rules and like how do you put armies together and like how you set up the table and there's a lot of rules. And this is one of the first times, because I was like 20 when I was working in this particular shop, and we would organize game nights and stuff like that for people to come in, bring their toy soldiers in, meet people, enjoy games. And these games had like basic rules of engagement, and it's kind of aimed at a little bit older crowd. So like these games are really for like kids like 16 years and up. And at one point we had a bunch of 12-year-old kids, and they had painted some models, and they had like a mismatch of like weird stuff on the table, and they had put stuff down, and they had everything they had painted, they had put on the table across from each other, and they were laughing and having fun, and they were moving models around, and they were using dice to play these games. But they were not playing by any set of rules that anybody in the store recognized. And other kids, older kids and adults were looking at them and said, like, these kids, like, what are they doing? They don't know what they're doing. They don't know how to play. They have no agreements. They're not following any of the rule books. And they were these kids would come in every week, and they would have the most fun of everybody in that place. And everybody else was looking at them, it's like, yeah, they don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're doing. And at one point, a bit older guys, I don't know, also like 20, it's like, "Oh, these kids, they drive me nuts. Like, they don't know what they're doing. Why are they here?" And I said, actually, they're having more fun than you are, right? And they have a very perfect agreement between the two of them that allows them to play with a lot less resources than you have, because these kids didn't have the big armies because they haven't been playing that long, and they just had models that they thought were really cool that you're not supposed to put in the same place. So they couldn't play the normal rules because that would have made the game not fun. So they had to come up with their own rules to make that work. And those two guys were like some of the closest friends you could see. And when I highlighted that to this little bit older guy, he said like, "Well, yeah, actually, I never really looked at it that way." And as a result, they stopped like gatekeeping like this. Some other friends would come in, and eventually that became a very big group of kids that would basically like frequent the store. I'm sure some of them are still some of the best friends that you can think of. So play itself doesn't always have to be outside. There is internal versions of this, and to be honest, like you've probably seen your kids play with things like Lego and other stuff where you go like, what are these kids doing? And I think like there is more opportunities for all of you to sort of let that play happen. If you want to get really down to the core of that way of thinking about it, maybe it's time to rewatch the Lego movie, because the core message of the Lego movie is that like playing with stuff differently and having your own imagination is actually a really good way of using this amazing stuff that is Lego. So even Lego itself knows that this is actually what is the core strength of what Lego is supposed to be. And I think you can actually give that to your kids as well. So if there's some more questions from you guys around like what you can do with play, I'm sure maybe something around like how to bring up the courage yourself. Please type it in, or you can leave it in the weekly Q&A. So I would love to see some more questions like, okay, what can we do to help play happen more often, more frequently? Know that like in any bits of the academic works that we know play such an important role. And ask yourself, like, do you guys get anywhere close with your kids to that like worrying number of 9 hours in the Netherlands, right? So, and what would it need to take to facilitate that for your younger kids, or even for some of your older kids? Like, what kind of stuff could you bring together? And like, I was walking by the ECA, one of the ECA classrooms where there's a Warhammer club happening in one of the schools I was working with. That class went from 5 kids to now, I think, like 20 kids playing like Warhammer. None of them have armies that fit any of the rule books, but they're all really enjoying themselves. Right. So like, don't just think like, oh, just because I have a kid in primary that like, or in secondary, that ship has sailed. Right. So you can still facilitate this for your kids. But if there's no other questions, then I thank you a lot for your time today. If you want to see this particular video again, look at our YouTube page. More than we uploaded them there every time the day after we get them. And yeah, again, if you have any more questions, put them in the Q&A. I'd love to talk more about them next week. Thank you very much for all your time today. Thank you.
Thanks, DJ.
All right. Have a good evening, everybody.
Yeah.